Okay, so Kirsten, I'm going to make you a co-host here.
Okay, amazing.
Let's find the right person to make a co-host. If I can find you, there we go. Okay, so you should be a co-host now, Kirsten, which means you can help keep an eye on the waiting room. We'll just have to admit everyone who signs in as we're going along here.
Absolutely. I will do that.
Thanks everyone for saying hello in the chat. Feel free to pop a message in, let us know where you're joining us from. Um, I will, I'm just going to steal your share for 1 second here while we just do a quick intro, if that's okay. Okay. Okay, great. We'll just go ahead and get started here. Thanks everyone for joining us for another Lake Stewardship Community of Practice meeting with the Alberta Lake Management Society. If you are new to the session, my name's Brad. I'm the Executive Director here at ALMS, and we've got Kirsten Latender in the office today supporting us in case we have any difficulties, helping to admit people, and also can help with the Q&A following both of our presentations. So our sessions usually run from about 12 till 1:30, and today we have two presentations, Dr. Ken Wagner and Dr. Dörte Köster, talking about the topic of in-lake treatment. And usually these sessions are opportunities for our lake stewardship societies to present to one another. This time we have more of kind of experts in the field presenting on a specific topic. So I hope everyone finds that informative today. If you haven't checked out any of our past events, just from this year, we had a session on drought featuring three different lake stewardship societies, some of the work they're doing on remediating drought conditions at their lakes. We had a topic on the history and future of lake management with or not Dr., with David True from the Mayatin Lake Management Association. And most recently, we had stories of restoration featuring Pigeon Lake Watershed Association, the Wizard Lake Watershed and Lake Stewardship Society, and Wabamun Watershed Management Council. That session is now online if you want to check that out on our website. So specifically, we were talking about Himalayan balsam removal at Pigeon Lake, ditch restoration in an area of the Wizard Lake watershed that is draining some significant nutrients into the lake, and bulrush restoration and aquatic invasive species management at Wabamun Watershed Management Council. I probably have all your acronyms wrong again. I'm so sorry, everyone. I cannot keep the lake stewardship acronyms straight in my head. So my apologies if I've got anything wrong there. But please check that out. This will be our last kind of official webinar in this 2026 series that was supported by the Land Stewardship Center of Canada with a bit of grant funding. But I think this is an important resource that we offer to our lake stewards across Alberta. And so we do plan to keep this going, even despite the recent closure of the Land Stewardship Center and the uncertainty around the future of the Watershed Stewardship Grant Program. So I think despite that, we'll keep this webinar series going in some capacity into the future because there's lots of topics I think that are still well worth discussing. So what we'll do is jump right into our first presentation, and I'm so pleased that Dr. Ken Wagner has been able to join us today. We had some back and forth about scheduling because Ken is extremely busy. Ken's also in a different time zone from us right now. just got back from Europe. He was just telling me he's got multiple injuries from a pickleball to the face and falling into a trash can while while helping his wife out. So I'm so pleased you're able to join us. Ken has kind of been a go-to for us on this topic for many years. I first remember meeting you when you came out in 2011 to our Chestermere conference. And since then, has been constant presence at NALMS, has been the president of NALMS, has been the editor of Lake and Reservoir Management, has been working on internal phosphorus control projects for decades now. Also during COVID, supported our online webinar series with a similar presentation on this topic. So yeah, just really pleased that this all worked out, Ken. So I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll invite you to share your screen and feel free to take it away. We will have lots of time for questions after Ken's presentation, but feel free to pop your questions into the chat while we're going here, and then we can always throw them to Ken after his presentation. So yeah, feel free to take it away, Ken.
Okay. Are you seeing my screen at this point?
No, let's try
It's still showing as
resharing.
sharing here. I may have to stop the share and bring it back. Just let me know.
There we go. I think
Okay.
it's
We're
working
good.
now.
All
Sorry.
right.
Yes.
Great.
Okay.
Well,
Go for it.
happy to be with you. All my injuries are minor. They're mostly stupid things. uh, and I can still sit in a chair and talk, so I guess I'm in good shape. It's nice to see some familiar faces and some names on the list. I see Al Sosiak's out there. Dorta's another speaker, and I see John Mark Davies is on there, all old friends. So uh, yeah, I'm going to talk to you a bit. Well, the title says phosphorus inactivation for control of cyanobacteria in lakes, but it's a little more involved with it. I'm going to try to give you some of the basis for why we do this at all, and then go into what we can actually do. It's fortuitous that I am working right now, and I mean right now, literally the last 3 days have been the writing phase on a paper on the history of phosphorus inactivation with aluminum in New England lakes. I've been collecting the data for over a year. And now I'm actually literally in the writing phase. And actually, literally today, I'm working on the adverse impact. So I've got both sides covered. All right. Didn't want to advance. Oh, there it goes. Okay, so why do we have to control phosphorus in the first place? Probably preaching to the choir here. Most of you folks realize this. Lots of things influence algal blooms and lake condition, but really nothing is more important than phosphorus. That's not to say the other things aren't important. A lot of them are really influential in terms of what types of algae will grow, but the actual presence of algae is highly dependent on phosphorus. Nitrogen's also in the same conversation. The catch is nitrogen is 78% of our atmosphere. You can't get rid of it. There's no way to control it. You can slow the transfer down, whereas phosphorus is in really short supply. So that becomes the easiest thing to go after. Obviously, it comes in from runoff, even base flow, groundwater, precipitation, and various forms of internal loading. The runoff and the internal loading are usually the two biggest sources. So it's the interplay between those. How much is from the watershed? How much is already in the lake? That makes a great deal of difference. And you have to know where you are on that continuum to make good management decisions. And I'll go into that more. The internal load can come from a bunch of ways. It isn't one thing. Decomposition, either oxic or anoxic, ingestion and excretion by fish and invertebrates. You have uptake and release by plants, particularly during senescence in the fall, and redox reactions. The last of that being probably the biggest source and the one we deal with the most with these nutrient activation programs. Basically, when the bottom goes anoxic, when there is no oxygen at the sediment water interface, reactions occur that release phosphorus back into the water column. And it's got its set of complications, and there's other things that could be alternative sources of oxygen, like nitrates or sulfates, and there's a whole sequence of what goes on. When you lose the oxygen, okay, that's the end of measuring the oxygen, but the redox potential can continue to grow. So you get more and more severe need for oxygen, which means more release of phosphorus. So there's a whole continuum there. The point is, in the end, more phosphorus means more algae. That diagram on the left is a straightforward generalization from a whole lot of literature. Basically, more phosphorus means more chlorophyll. And there's a lot of variability when you get to the higher end of that scale. So it doesn't necessarily have to go up. It could even go down depending upon things like biological interactions or trace nutrients. But clearly, overall, more phosphorus means more algae. The more interesting diagram from my perspective is on the right. One of my favorite papers of all time, maybe not the prettiest graph, is simply showing that as phosphorus goes up, you get more cyanobacteria. It's a straight empirical relation. John Downing, a Canadian, worked on this. Sue Watson's Canadian. This is a great piece of work based on like 10,000 different data sets. And all they're showing you is that most algae stay the same in terms of their portion of the community, or they decrease as a proportion. Cyanobacteria increase. Now, they use the log scale on the bottom, which I never much like. The point is the log scale of 1 is 10 micrograms per liter of phosphorus. That's a pretty nice number. Log 2 between the 1.8 and the 3 is 100 micrograms per liter. That is a lot of phosphorus, more than any algae ever need. So somewhere in that stretch between 10 and 100 micrograms per liter, we go from relatively little cyanobacteria to being dominated by cyanobacteria. And there's other ones. Dan Canfield in Florida, also deceased recently. His team also found the same sort of thing working on lakes there. And the more algae you had, the more likely it was to be cyanobacteria. So these are just straightforward empirical relationships. There's really sort of like having climate change arguments. You can debate the causes, but you can't disagree that it's occurring. Same thing here. There's other things that are important, but phosphorus really does control productivity. Okay, climate change. Well, this is not a talk on climate change. I'm not going to go into great detail, but really, the major influence of climate change has been during my lifetime, almost exactly during my lifetime, from the mid-50s until now. The diagram on the right is just showing you there really wasn't a whole lot going on, from the late 1800s to the mid-1900s in terms of a change. But since about 1960 on, we've got a distinct increase in temperatures. That affects a lot of different things. The warmer water is going to grow more everything, increases metabolism, and cyanobacteria like warmer water. It has to do with the fact they store cyanophycean sugars, and those are better metabolized at higher temperatures. The flip side is things like diatoms or golden algae, which store oils. They like cold water, strictly a function of metabolism. There's greater organic loading from climate change. We get bigger storms. People worry about all the nutrients washing into lakes. I'm getting way more concerned about the organic matter being washed into lakes because that's got to decay and it sucks out oxygen. And that's what leads us to the low oxygen conditions that lead us to the increase in phosphorus recycling. That faster oxygen loss will occur over a greater portion of the bottom, which means more areas contributing. I've done a lot of evaluations in the last decade on lakes looking at the internal loading. Almost invariably, it's a function of expanding anoxia over a bigger area of the lake bottom. I've got one lake in Maine that looks like an inverted witch's hat. As long as the low oxygen stays in that long, pointy part upside down, not a big deal. But if it comes out and spills over the brim, they have all kinds of problems. And there's examples like that all over. You get release of phosphorus by these redox reactions. You don't get as much of a release of nitrogen, which means the nutrients are coming in at a lower nitrogen to phosphorus ratio. That favors cyanobacteria because they're able, not all, but most of them are able to utilize that atmospheric oxygen dissolved in water. They can take N2 gas and turn it into amino acids. They can get what they need that way. They don't have to have nitrate or ammonia. So there's a real issue there with the nutrient ratios being important to cyanobacteria. And then finally, we get fairly stable water columns, stronger stratification. Blue-grains love that. They can control their buoyancy to some degree. Again, a lot of them, not all of them. And they're able to control where they are. If the system's being mixed, they don't have as much control. That's why mixing and aeration systems sometimes do work to control blue-grains. Unfortunately, they also mix whatever nutrients are in the lake throughout the lake, so you can actually make things worse. But that's a whole different talk. The conclusion from an international conference on climate change with regard to aquatic management was that phosphorus control was the number one thing we could do to hedge our bets. And the reality, if you follow things like the International or Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, I may be one of the 3 people that ever read their entire last report. It was over 2,000 pages. I got paid to do it. I had to advise some clients. They came out saying that if we did everything we could to control climate change, it's not going to turn around for 100 years. And if we do a half-assed job, which is what we're doing, certainly in the US, that's going to be 200 years. So we're not going to get rid of this anytime soon. So we've got to find other ways to manage our lakes. And controlling phosphorus seems to be the number one choice. All right, science of watershed management. I get accused in a number of circles of not favoring watershed management, and that is untrue. Absolutely believe in watershed management, but I'm a realist. Dick Osgood's the guy that gets accused of it, and probably true. He doesn't much like it because he's documented that it's never worked in any of his situations. And it's not that he's bad at it. The problem is watersheds have limits to what they can handle, and lakes have limits to what they can handle from the watershed. And once we start totally urbanizing or making a lake or a watershed agricultural, we lose that control. There are limits to what we can do. You have protection versus remediation. Now, we'd all love to protect lakes, but it doesn't work like that. I mean, as a consultant, I never get called by anybody saying, hey, I've got a lovely lake. Could you help me protect it? No, I get called because the lake looks like you know what, and I want you to fix it. So the protection part is watershed management. Remediation could involve the watershed, but it often has to involve the lake as well. And there you have 3 different levels: restoration, truly putting it back the way it is. If you know example of that, please let me know, because I don't know of a single one, and I've been doing this work for 49 years. We don't restore anything. We rehabilitate. We fix certain aspects to make it what we want for different uses, but we can't actually put it back the way it was. And then maintenance, which is just over and over doing rehabilitation. And sometimes that's the best you can hope for. It's objectionable. We don't want to be in that position, but sometimes there's not a lot of choice. So the value of watershed management is in protection. And the limits in urban and agricultural areas are very real. Works out that once you get about 6% developed, either urban or agriculture, you start seeing water quality changes. Once you get to 25 or 30%, you're guaranteed changes. You're not going to stop them. There's no best management practice in the world that's going to keep that from happening. It's never been done. What I want to give you is the leaky boat analogy to sort of nail this down. If you think of the lake as being a boat and the watershed as being the lake, if you have leaks in your boat, you should patch them. Obviously, your boat's going to fill with water if you don't. But if you don't patch them and the boat fills with water, and then you patch the leaks, you still have a useless boat because it's full of water. If it's still floating for whatever reason, you can't do anything with it. So you have to do both. You have to plug the leaks and you have to bail out the water. Now, if your lake or your boat is really in pretty good shape, it's got a couple tiny loose rivets, and it's sitting there for a week when you're not around, it gets half an inch of water in the bottom. Well, I can bail that out or turn on the bilge pump and I can still go fishing all day and it's no big deal. But if I've got a huge gash in the hull, it doesn't matter how fast I bail out. The water's going to come in faster and the boat is not going to be useful. There's an entire continuum from watersheds that marginally impact the lake. They all impact them, but marginally, to watersheds that totally dominate the condition of the lake. You have to know where you are on that continuum to know how to manage. Okay, I'm going to give you a case that actually underscores where all this is coming from. In this diagram on the right, aerial map of Stafford Pond in Tiverton, Rhode Island. In the 1980s and early 90s, they had some serious algal blooms there, and it's a water supply. So they were pretty upset over it. It's 195 hectares, almost 500 acres, 7.5 meters depth, about 23, 24 feet. And up here, if you can see my cursor going there, upper right part was a dairy farm. And in the 80s, it's literally got a manure delta up in that upper right cove. And it was like, whoa, this is pretty outrageous. And the lake went bad. It's not a surprise. When we went in, first interchange with the farmer was that if we set foot on his property, he would shoot us. We got past that, had some legitimate discussions, and found that he used to keep all the cows over here on the right across the road out of the watershed. Over time, and the place had been there for 100 years, he claimed it was the same cows. He moved the cows across the road closer in, and that's when the trouble started. So rather than telling me I had to move them back, not really able to do that, at least in this country when it comes to agriculture, we got him a whole bunch of grants to do things better, to process the manure, to create constructed wetlands, to put in berms so the stuff wouldn't run off and go into the lake. And we went from being threatened with being shot to being the best guys in the world. Hey, come on over, have a beer. What else could I do? It was a big success story. Everybody got to be a hero for 10 years. And then the lake went bad again. And nobody could understand what was going on. So I went back out. The first thing I did was drive the boat up here. No more delta of manure. Well, they didn't dredge it. It just worked its way out into the deeper water. And now we have this huge internal recycling problem because we failed to plug that leak. So we had to do an aluminum treatment, phosphorus inactivation, which we did in 2021. And now going into 2026, they have not had a cyanobacteria bloom since. Worked well. So I guess we're all heroes again for the time being. The point is, this was both a matter of finding the leaks and plugging them and bailing the water out of the boat. You have to do both in most cases. Maybe if you get to the watershed soon enough, you don't have to deal with it in the lake. If the watershed is in a situation where you can't control it, you may only be able to deal with it in the lake. Okay, shift gears a little and talk about cyanobacteria bloom formation. There's a lot of ecology here. I'll simplify it. There's 3 ways that a bloom can occur. Well, 4 if you count washing in from upstream, but we'll forget that one for the time being. You can have a bunch of particles in the upper part of the water, and they can have plenty of nutrients around and they grow into a bloom. Be honest, when I started my career in the 1970s with the state of New Jersey as the state phycologist, which is somebody who studies algae, but nobody in a steno pool could spell that, so they called me the state psychologist. And they abbreviated it to the state psycho, which was probably more accurate. But that doesn't happen. It's not, well, it does. It's rare. That's what we all thought would happen. It wasn't the way blooms happened at all. And we've only learned this in the last 20 or 30 years. Although there were guys writing about this in the 1930s and 40s, we just didn't listen to them. And really, it was a cadre of female limnologists from New England that hit on this. What they found was a lot of the blue-greens were starting on the bottom. They were getting their nutrition right at the sediment-water interface. The phosphorus didn't even have to get into the water column. They were sucking it up before it ever got there. Then they would form gas pockets in their cells, a physiological adaptation of cyanobacteria, and float up to form the bloom. Now, the reality is they're not the only ones that do it. A lot of green algae will start as benthic mats. They'll trap their own photosynthetic gases, and they'll also float up. They're loaded with nutrients. Now they get more light, and they can grow like crazy till they run out of nutrients. Then it turns out there's a third mechanism growing right near the thermocline. There's just enough light from above and just enough nutrients from below that they can grow there. And then there's a windstorm comes up or stratification ends in the fall, and that stuff gets mixed up into the top. Brad and I were talking about Planktothrix recently. Planktothrix is famous for this mode. It grows right there, and it's got tremendous buoyancy control. It can go down here and pick up nutrients by night. You can come back up and even get into the upper water by day for more light, and then settle back around the thermocline for easy living. The ones that do this off of the bottom here are the more common ones we run into: Microcystis, Dolichospermum, which is now what we call most Anabaena, and Aphanizomenon. So between those are like the big names in cyanobacteria blooms. And it turns out that very few of them start in the upper water column. They mostly start as benthic growths or around the thermocline. So deep lakes have a lot going on. But it's not just a deep lake phenomenon. If you think about a shallow lake, you've got this organic layer over a lot of the bottom. Even though you may be measuring oxygen a foot or quarter meter off the bottom, there may be no oxygen right at that sediment water interface. In fact, I found that's the case most of the time. As a result, those algae can grow right there. So people go down and they do their oxygen measurements. And if you ever listen to the oxygen probe companies, they tell you not to stick it in the sediment. Ignore that. Get your probe right down into the sediment and find out if it's anoxic. If it is, it's prime nursery grounds for cyanobacteria to grow and then pop up. Now, I ask you this. Any of you that have dealt with algae blooms, how many times have you noticed it's starting to get cloudy, but the bloom doesn't really get going for 3 weeks to a month later? And if you say yes to that, you need to get a hold of me because that's another one where I hardly ever see it. What you mostly hear is, it was fine last week and this week it's pea soup. Yeah, it's because these other mechanisms have them grow somewhere else. Then they synchronously rise and create the problem. It's not organic growth in the water column. That can happen, but most of the time it's coming off the bottom or in deeper water. And particularly in shallow lakes, it just pops right up. So with that going on, we have to really worry about what's in that sediment that can be made available. If we can keep it well oxygenated, we can stop that from happening. But that's really hard to do in a shallow lake. It's actually easier to do in a deep lake. So we wind up trying to find other alternatives. I should have added in there, once it's up in the water column, now the amount of phosphorus up there makes a huge difference. That's where the watershed matters. You may be getting some phosphorus from the bottom as well, but that's where the inputs from the watershed matter. If I have blooms that pop up and they're totally a function of what was on the bottom or the middle layer, they're only going to last a week or two. So if you have lakes where it blooms, then drops out, then maybe blooms again and drops out, that's classic indication of this sort of from the bottom up routine. If on the other hand it blooms and it just stays blooming, okay, you've got a problem in your upper water column as well, and you really got to work on plugging the leaks. And maybe you need to do that before you think about the internal recycling. Okay. So again, there's a lot of different modes. This is filamentous cyanobacteria like Oscillatoria or Formidium, which, like the green algae, will trap its own gases and float up. They don't do it by vacuoles in the cells. They don't have that ability. But Gliotrichia, Dolichospermum, Aphanizomenon, Microcystis, Warnicinia, and Planktothrix all have these aerotopes, these gas pockets in the cells that control buoyancy. They all utilize that mechanism. And if we can control phosphorus, we can control them. Okay, so now the meat of it, how do we do it? There's actually a bunch of ways. You can do dilution and flushing. It doesn't happen a lot. I have one lake ever that I've fixed by doing that because it had a river right next to it that we could divert through it. If you've got a Moses Lake, which is in Washington, a little south and east, southwest of you guys, they reroute the Columbia River through it, and it's worked. You can dilute and you can flush, but you don't have that much water to work with most of the time. Another alternative would be hypolytic withdrawal. You're going to discharge the high phosphorus water out the pipe and do that enough that you run it out of the surplus. Now, ideally, you want to do that so much that it never goes anoxic, but that's really hard to do because you drain your lake in most summers. So the reality is you have to accept a certain amount of poor quality water going downstream, and you can improve a lake. I have 2 cases here in New England, one I dealt with directly, one I just know about, where that definitely improved the lake over time. Al Sosiak's on the call. He wrote a paper a few years back about Pine Lake in Alberta. The catch is this usually won't get you where you want to go in the end. It'll improve it, but it takes a lot of years, often 20 plus, and the results tail off over time. So I've never seen a lake stop having cyanobacteria blooms because they had hypolytic withdrawal. I've seen them get less severe. I've seen them become less frequent, but it's never completely gotten rid of them. So that leaves me with 3 things that I know will work to eliminate blooms. One is dredging. Now, it can be hydraulic. You don't have to drain the lake, but you've got to remove all that problem sediment that's supplying the internal phosphorus. And of course, you also have to have taken care of the leaks in the watershed. That's pretty severe. I often tell people if money and permits were no object, I would dredge a lot of lakes. I've done 15 maybe in my career. Money and permits are always an object. It's a big deal. So this is hard to do. And it's pretty severe just to try to control phosphorus. Oxygenation is a fascinating one. This could be the subject of a whole course, let alone the whole lecture. There are many ways to do this. You can circulate the water which will usually improve oxygen, but again, it's also going to circulate the nutrients. I don't find that as successful as other options. The best is if you can bring the oxygen to the bottom of the lake, shallow or deep, get a blanket of highly oxygenated water on the bottom. That will minimize the transfer and those redox reactions, the transfer of phosphorus into the overlying water. And that will minimize the ability of the blue-greens to grow at that sediment water interface. It'll minimize the accumulation of phosphorus in the hypolimnion, which means you can't have that growth near the thermocline in a deep lake. It works pretty well. And now, after literally 50 years of messing with techniques, we have a couple techniques that work. One is literally diffusing pure oxygen at the bottom of the lake. The catch is you've got to have at least 6 meters of run distance to dissolve it all. Otherwise, you're going to destratify the lake. So that only works in pretty deep lakes. The other is what they call side stream supersaturation, or the latest version of they call oxygen saturation technology. You pull the bottom water into a chamber, you super oxygenate it, and you put it back where you got it. And the thermal barrier, the gradient is enough to keep it right down there. I have one recreational lake that I've been working with now for 6 years, well, 7 years now. The first 3 years they tried a nanobubble solution, which did not work. The next 3 years they tried an oxygen saturation technology thing. It took us 2 years to get it working right, but now for the last 2+ years, we've had very good results. So this does work. Water suppliers do this fairly frequently because, one, they get better quality water and it minimizes their treatment costs. Two, they have ratepayers and they have staff that can run it. You don't see recreational lakes doing this very much because you have ongoing operational costs and somebody's got to operate it. And with oxygen, you can't let it go bad. You can't have it break down when you're on vacation for a week and then come back to bad conditions. You can't recover in the same year by putting the oxygen back. It doesn't work. You have to keep it up the whole time. So it's a little tricky in that regard, but you get a lot of additional benefits. Better fish habitat, better invertebrates, better lake overall. I'm a big fan of oxygenation. It's just, it is a bit more expensive and it does require ongoing operational and organizational creativity. So that leaves us with phosphorus inactivation, which is really the key subject today. You're basically binding the phosphorus to make it unavailable. You've got multiple ways you can go about this. You can treat to inactivate it in the sediments. That means a pretty high dose, could be as little as 10 or 20 grams per square meter, but they often go up around 100 or even more. And you're putting it out by a barge. You're treating everywhere deep enough to have low oxygen, which is absolutely going to be probably anything under 15 to 20 feet deep. But as we're finding out, sometimes shallower areas also have no oxygen right at the sediment water interface, like I talked about. And because they didn't put the probe down in those peripheral areas, they undertreat the area. That's a major risk in why these treatments don't always work well. And then you need to know what kind of a dose to do. And there's 5 or 6 different ways to calculate the dose, none of which are perfect. I always advise people to do it at least 2 different ways and come up with a happy medium. But by and large, these bigger doses laid over a suitable area will stop the phosphorus from coming out of the sediment and will stop the blue-greens from growing. And it does work. Now, there are plenty of failures, but that's because they either didn't treat a big enough area or they didn't use a big enough dose. And the one oddball thing is in a saline environment, it doesn't work very well because a lot of other stuff interferes with the aluminum binding. But for your basic freshwater lake, you can do this, and I guarantee it will work if it's done right. Now, how long it'll last is going to be a function of whether or not you've plugged the leaks in the watershed. So that's another story. Second way you can use it seems like the first way, but it's just same idea, but it's a lower dose, typically 1 to 5 milligrams per liter, and you're basically stripping the water column of phosphorus. You'll get some phosphorus inactivation in the sediment as well, but you're not trying to stop it all up there. You're just trying to clear the water column. This is really useful for lakes with a fairly long detention time. I have one in Maine that we did, and it's supposed to last us at least 10 years. All we're really doing is trying to buy time so they can plug the leaks in the watershed. But for the interim, and it's a water supply also, we wanted to stop the blooms, and it has worked. We did it in 2019, and we haven't bloomed since, so 7 years at this point. but we've probably only got another 3 years to go before it starts up again, and they haven't plugged enough leaks. Um, so it's the same idea. It's just you're really focused on the water column, and it's less expensive. It also works really well for not real short detention, but moderate detention time, urban or agricultural lakes where you just can't deal with the watershed. I mean, I've got one in Connecticut that is entirely urbanized. A major highway goes through it, and we've had no luck at all getting the towns or the state to do anything about phosphorus control. It has to be done in the lake. So typically twice a year we treat it, and it's worked well. I'll show you the example. The third way is to actually dose the tributaries coming in. Now, if you've got a small lake with lots of input points, it's not going to be feasible. But if you've got a lake with one big or maybe two tributaries, you could literally dose the incoming storm water. We just treat during the storms and clean that water up. You may want a detention area where it drops out. Your lake may be big enough that it's okay to do it that way. But ultimately, you can clean it up. I only have two of those that I've worked with. But again, one of them that I've done the longest has really good results. And I'll show you these. All right. So here's an example of the classic one shot, treat the lake well, stop the blooms. This lake had blooms beforehand. It had quite a few. These are just 2 years where I had phytoplankton data from, and the blue-green color are blue-greens. The cyanobacteria, you can see it was pretty big. Anything over 1 milligram per liter is getting to be a fair amount of algae. Over 3 is a real problem. So they were clearly in bad shape there. And it was past inputs. There was a turkey farm. There was a vegetable farm. There was a whole lot of stuff going into this lake, which was about a 250 hectare lake. So it wasn't tiny. And it was deep, 60 feet. But all that, and all those things were gone now. The leaks are plugged. Those are no longer issues. But they loaded this lake over time. And it wasn't bad all the time. Not every year looked like the two I showed you there, but a lot of them did. So they did the treatment, and there's your algal data ever since. I do this algal data based on 6 samples a year from 2 different sites. I'm looking at each of these is 12 samples worth per year. So it's a pretty good thing. I've got it for individual samples, but this is easier to look at from an annual basis. You can see that the blue-greens are a minor component. We rarely get above 1. We never get above 3. And they're just thrilled with this, and they are now 17 years into it. So it's good. It worked extremely well. I can show you examples where it didn't work as well, and invariably you find the dose wasn't high enough or the area treated wasn't big enough. You got to know those. Or the last thing, they didn't have enough of the leaks plugged in the watershed. Okay, this is the one I mentioned in Connecticut. So here's a lake. It's a 23 hectares. It's got a huge watershed, 50 to 100 times the size of it, completely urbanized, although there's still some areas being developed with very poor controls. The water during a storm looks like chocolate milk going into the lake. And this is a lake that has 140 homes around it that form an association and have a swimming beach. Well, up until 2015, there was nobody swimming in that lake. It was a mess. It was pea soup, blue-green. It was just awful. It was dangerous. The toxin levels were high. It was a total mess. They tried some different things without a whole lot of luck. They've been trying to plug the leaks, and it's been just a nightmarish exercise. So I said, well, we could try this in the lake. We could try a low-dose treatment. So this is literally 2 milligrams per liter being put into this lake, 1 tanker truckload coming in, and it knocked it down some. Wasn't amazing, but they didn't have a bloom in 2015. That little bit of change made a difference. No big spikes. If you can't read this, this is 50 micrograms per liter, which is too much. And this is 100 micrograms per liter, which is outrageous. So this lake was routinely above those levels in the summer. Here we stayed below 100. We didn't get below 50. Then we do this for a couple more years. Now we're starting to do it 2 times a year. Now we're hitting the internal load and we're dealing with the stuff that came in from the watershed. We're doing this typically at the end of June when the spring flows have subsided, and then again in late July or early August because it doesn't last the whole time and we do still have rain and inputs. And you can see it's just squelching the phosphorus. We're down below 50 every time after 2017. 2017 was the last time we were above as a minor when they were in 2019, but you can see we've squashed it down. The average is now 27 micrograms per liter, still too high. I don't like it that high. We're getting algae, but we're getting dinoflagellates, goldens, diatoms, things that aren't toxic, things that zooplankton can eat, and it's not cyanobacteria. It's completely changed it. They've been swimming, they're happy with it. It's a success, but it's a maintenance success. We haven't fixed the watershed, and we need to. But it's really hard to do in an urban watershed, particularly when you have a state and a town that aren't really cooperating. Okay, and then the last one is to inject it into the tributaries. This is the one I've worked with now for 16 years. I gave it up this year. Somebody else is now running it. That's part of my retirement plan. It's the original thing that is, which we ran with up until this year, has a couple tanks, and then it's got this box with these pumps in it and various controls. And initially, we would come in, and these are all your data from before treatment. We'd come in, flip it on when it rained, which did sometimes mean somebody had to go in the middle of the night, turn it on, and treat for a few hours. Clean up the water as best we could and see what we got. Well, beforehand, you had Secchi readings that were never over 3 meters and usually down around 2 meters. And we had a lot of algae. It wasn't just cyanobacteria, but they had a lot of algae. And our phosphorus was routinely above 20 micrograms per liter and often up in the 30 to 40 range. And that's just too much. You really want to be down around 10, certainly less than 20. So when we did this the first 3 years, we got great results. We're up around 3 meters for clarity. We didn't have any blue-greens to speak of. And our phosphorus got down there around 20 micrograms per liter. Not bad. Unfortunately, between people getting tired of getting up in the middle of the night, the supplier not always bringing the chemical when we wanted it, and the chemical kind of eating the equipment, it didn't go so well for the next 3 years. We really weren't significantly different than beforehand. We did have a lot of blue-green algae problems, but I'm not so sure it was our treatment. It may have just been the hydrology those years. We said, all right, if we're going to do this, let's do it right. So we revamped the system. It's still the same system, but this extra box got added, which is a lot of controls. It's remote control now. It comes on automatically. There's a precipitation station that you see sticking up there in that one. It's over here now in the new version. The precipitation station sets it off. It runs at a prescribed amount for a prescribed amount of time, and then checks the precipitation again and runs again if it needs to. And I can go on my phone and with a little program just punch, I want to keep running. Now I want to stop it. No, I want to use a higher precipitation value. No, I want to make it go put out more at once. I can do whatever I want without ever going there, and it will run automatically without me doing a thing. And look at the results. I mean, just fantastic Secchi, much lower phosphorus. And these are out in the lake. We're treating about 2/3 of the lake volume in late May through early July. And then the idea is you're going to go through the summer based on having cleaned the water up, and it won't get bad in the meantime. And that held up every year except 2021 and 2023. Both of those years we had okay springs. We went into the summer in good condition, but it rained. In 2021, it rained for 17 days straight after 4th of July. I mean, just every day. So everything we did was flushed out of the lake. It's not that big a lake. It's 100 acres. It's 40 hectares. And it just flushed it all out and put poor quality water in its place. Same thing in 2023. It just rained a lot. Now, we could have kept treating, but that wasn't the permit. That wasn't the plan. It was just to do it. And then we got back in 2024 to normal. 2025 isn't shown here. I just added those data yesterday for my paper. Same idea. It was a little better actually in 2025. And those were drier springs and summers. So really, really effective in a lake that's highly urbanized, 50 times the watershed's area of the lake. It can flush in a few days if the water really gets cranking, but that doesn't happen in the summer most of the time. That's mostly a spring or winter phenomenon. So as long as we treat 2/3 of the water in the lake and get it down somewhere between 10 and 20 micrograms per liter going into summer, we get through it just fine. And actually in these 2 years, the 2 bad years, we actually didn't get algae blooms. It was just flushing so much that they never developed. But we had low clarity because we had color from upstream wetlands, and we had a lot of particulate matter suspended in the water column. So it looked lousy, but it wasn't algae. So the system has worked. What we are finding is the tail end of the season, We're getting blue-greens popping up and accumulating along shore. It's after the swim season. They're not too worried about it. But I know what's happening. We're only treating 2 months of the year. Everything else is loading that lake up the rest of the year, and we're getting internal recycling. So we may have to do a whole lake treatment there to get it back where it is. They did institute a law in the state that basically bans phosphorus in fertilizers except for starters on lawns. So we are getting less and less coming in. What used to average 136 micrograms per liter coming into the lake in a storm is now down to 60 to 70. So it's literally cut in half. We still need this system, but we're getting there. Whether we can actually get there with an urban watershed, I doubt, but we're moving in the right direction. We're plugging leaks, but we can't plug them all. It's hard. All right. There are other ways to inactivate phosphorus. You can use lanthanum. That's the active ingredient in Phoslock, which has been more used in Canada than aluminum. Utrazorb is from Cipro. That's another one that's similar. And there's some other formulations out there. I don't have a lot of experience with it. I can't tell you a whole lot other than what I've read or heard from others. It's combined with bentonite clay. That gets an advantage. The bentonite clay covers the organic sediment a little bit. I think that may help slow release it. It may alleviate some of the oxygen. Well, it doesn't alleviate demand. It may alleviate the expression of the demand into the overlying water. So there's some additional benefits here, I think. But it's not a coagulant. It's not going to settle out the algae. It's not going to bind up particulate phosphorus. It's only going to get the available soluble phosphorus that's out there. So you have to do your treatment before the algae gets bad. You've got to typically do these in early spring. And it does seem to be more specific for phosphorus than aluminum. You get a lower ratio of binder to phosphorus to get the job done. But it's also considerably more expensive than aluminum. So it's kind of a wash in there. It's a little more expensive to do the lanthanum. Calcium can be used. Actually, that work was pioneered in Alberta. That's Ellie Prepis and Brian Kotick and people like that 40 years ago. They got mixed results. I've tried it myself in dosing it into tributaries. It's not bad, but it doesn't hold the phosphorus if the pH drops off. And we have a lot of lakes where the pH drops off. There's only one piece in New England out on the western edge of Connecticut, Massachusetts, where the pH is high enough to make this work. You guys have a shot at in some places, so it's not out of the question. But again, I don't have a lot of experience with it. I know there are some newer formulations. There's a company called OASE, OASE, that's doing stuff with this. And it's a legitimate way to go. And calcium is more common out there, so it may be more accepted. And finally, iron. Iron is the reason we have to do these things, and it doesn't hold phosphorus when there's no oxygen. But if you load enough iron and use different forms, like the new things called zero-valent iron, it may bind more phosphorus. But I do know that if you combine iron with oxygenation, that works great. That's the natural process that's going on in a well-oxygenated lake. This happens to be a water supply for St. Paul and Minneapolis, Minnesota. They're dosing iron in, and you can see these were their phosphorus concentrations before they started doing it, and then they've dropped it way off. They're still not as low as they'd like to be, but they're way better off than they were combining iron with oxygenation. But it only works if you've got the oxygen. All right, so the conclusions I draw are that high phosphorus loading in all aspects of climate change favor cyanobacteria. If you're having cyanobacteria problems, it's because you've got warmer water and higher phosphorus. Control of phosphorus by watershed management's challenging, it's slow, it's expensive, can be impractical, and it's not going to fix the damaged lake by itself. It still needs to be done. It's patching the leaks that are filling your boat with water. But you can't count on watershed management to reverse a process that's been going on for years. You can prevent the problem, and I strongly encourage that. But if you're calling your consultant because your lake looks like pea soup, it's not likely they're going to be able to fix it working in the watershed. Use of phosphorus inactivation to lower the available phosphorus has absolutely reduced cyanobacteria blooms. I've got 10 of 15 water column treatments work great. 5 of them didn't work well. 3 of them were the salinity issue. The other 2, they're just getting hammered by the watershed so much that that little bit of relief isn't enough. So it's not perfect everywhere, but 2/3 of them it worked. In my Sediment treatments, the bigger doses, that's a harder one to evaluate because a lot of them are the last 10 to 15 years and they haven't run their course. Almost all of them have shifted in that they no longer have serious blooms most of the summer. Some of them just got to bloom late in the summer or a little bit of peripheral accumulation at fall turnover. They're way better than they were. And I think there's 2 or 3 failures in that. And they still were good when they first did the treatment, but it didn't last very long, not as long as they'd hoped. The flexibility, scalability, and the cost of control with phosphorus activation are really very favorable. In terms of removing kilograms of phosphorus, the cost is 1/10 of what it is to do it in the watershed. Now, again, I'm not saying you shouldn't do the stuff in the watershed, but it does mean that if you've got a problem you want to get under control, this is the cheapest way to do it. Maybe not the best, maybe not the most appropriate, maybe not the most legal, depending upon your permit system and your laws, but it is the cheapest way to do it. Now, there are adverse impacts. I didn't talk much about them. Aluminum, in particular, is toxic in its reactive state. If you keep the pH between 6 and 8, you're fine. If you're starting with a pH of 9, you've got to do something to bring the pH down before you can load it up with aluminum. If you've got a pH of less than 6, you got to go the other way. Early on, they used to plan doses based on how much can I put in before the pH gets out of that range. We've gotten way more sophisticated than that now. We have different aluminum products. We have different buffers. We have the ability to put the stuff in and make the pH go wherever we want it to go. And it works really, really well. You can kill fish. You can kill invertebrates, both by toxicity and smothering them in flock. You can't really do much to plants. That's never been much of an issue. But you can also avoid almost all of it by a proper treatment. We had the last toxic event in New England treatments was the year 2000. And we took it in the lab. We figured out what was going on. We have not had a problem since. That's 25 years of treatments with no fish kills. We do still get some flock burying invertebrates at the bottom, but most of the treatments are in deep water that has no oxygen. So there's no invertebrates down there you're really worried about. We've been forced to do a lot of studies on mussels. No mussel that I know of has ever even endured behavioral alteration, let alone mortality. And they've stopped making us do those studies because it hasn't been an issue. So it isn't really a real problem if you do the job right. But yes, there is the potential for things to go wrong if you do it wrong. All right, that is the bulk of what I wanted to cover. What I did want to show you is give you the benefit of these charts from this paper I'm working on. I've already made a few changes and I've done some rearranging that aren't shown here, but the bottom one are all of those sediment inactivation projects. There's 59 treatments in 50 lakes. 9 of them have been redone once because they've literally run their course in anywhere from 17 to 29 years. Pretty good track record. Typically, you get an increase in your clarity. It's only an average of 1.3 meters, but it's literally a 2/3 increase over whatever they had. The hypomimetic phosphorus decrease is huge. That's the hypomimetic there. It's literally 2/3 to 3/4 reduction. Epilomimetic, it's about a 1/3 reduction. So they're not gigantic. It's not night and day. And that's a good thing. You're not sterilizing the lake. You're altering the flow of nutrients in a way that means there's still productivity, but it's not by cyanobacteria, which aside from potentially being toxic, can't be eaten by very many zooplankton. Now we're turning the algae into consumable forms that feed the food web. There's nothing wrong with high algal productivity. You just don't want an algal logjam of high biomass. You want it being consumed. So a lot of these lakes are not any less productive than they were. They just have less standing crop of algae. In fact, several of them are way better fisheries than they used to be. That part's exciting. And a lot of it has that hypomimetic phosphorus decrease is the big deal. The epilomimetic is a little less, but it matters because you've shifted it just enough. Here it's a drop on average of a little under 10 micrograms per liter. But again, 30 micrograms per liter will give you a bloom of cyanobacteria. 20 typically won't. So that could literally move you from the bloom to the non-bloom category. Chlorophyll, average reduction is a little under 7 micrograms per liter. That's not that impressive. It's roughly a 50% reduction. The catch is it's no longer blue-greens. We've turned it into something else. So the fact that there's less chlorophyll is nice, I guess, but the reality is it's less chlorophyll in things that are better to have. That's really the key advantage. And then anoxic factor. This is something Gertrude Nürnberg, a Canadian, developed years ago. I love it. You're looking at it's the number of days that an area the size of the lake experience anoxia at the sediment water interface. Now, the whole area of the lake's not likely to ever be anoxic. So if I had half of the lake anoxic for a day, that's 0.5. And if it goes on for a week, that's 7 times 0.5 or 3.5. So the bigger the area and the longer the duration, the bigger this single number becomes. And the magic number, you want to be under 10. You definitely don't want to be over 30. Well, almost all the lakes that we treated were over 30 when we started. And on average, they got about a 10-day reduction in this anoxic factor. Well, that moves them from 30 to 20. That doesn't mean they're out of the woods. You want to be at 10. 7 of the 50 lakes went from above 10 to below 10. 33 of them, I think it was, went from above 30 to below 30. Some of them were at 50 and 60 and still didn't get down to 30. So it doesn't get rid of the problem of anoxia. It does make it a little better. And what it really means is there'll be a little more oxygen below the thermocline and a little less area being affected. That can be really good for fish and invertebrates. It's not as good as an oxygenation system will get you, but it's a good start. And then we look at just the basic shift from pre-treatment harmful algal blooms to post-treatment. Again, I had 33 that had blooms most of the summer, only 1 afterwards, a failure. I had 12 that were before it, only 8 after, not a big change. Patchy beforehand, 5 afterwards, not much of a change. Rare and peripheral were none before, but I'm down to 8 of those, and I have 26 where it's absent. So out of 50 treatments, literally half of them don't have algal blooms when they used to have them before. And most of the other ones are in much better shape. So that's where we're at on this. I can stop at that point. That's supposed to be about that amount of time, and we can go from there.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks so much, Ken. There are a number of questions popping up in the chat, so we can work through some of those. Let me just check in with our other speaker, Dörte. Did you want to jump in and comment on your part first before we do Q&A, and then we can do a Q&A all together, or do you want to take a pause to answer some questions?
How much time do we still have? It's like always another half an hour here.
Yeah.
Up to you. I mean, I don't need that much time, but I also do want to make sure that we do have the time. So maybe we can say 10 minutes questions when we get 2 hours, maybe something like that, just to make it
Sure.
to limit the time.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, I'll just keep this first Q&A to 10 minutes, and then I'm sure we'll have more time at the end for other questions. Right off the bat, I'm going to jump in with the first question, Ken, related to cost of treatment versus size of lake, because a lot of the lakes in Alberta, as you know, are quite large, and some of the lakes that are talking about in lake treatments are like 10,000 hectares or 25,000 hectares. So what's the experience with larger lakes? Does this scale up, and what would that mean for cost of treatment?
Yeah, I didn't give you the whole cost spiel, but I've worked that out as well. There is an economy of scale, but in general, you can expect it's going to cost about $175 per gram per square meter of dose per hectare that you treat. Now, it could be a little less than that on a big scale. You'll get a certain break on the labor, so maybe it drops a little bit, but I wouldn't expect it to be much below about $150. That is a lot of money when you're talking about thousands of hectares. The biggest treatments done to date are in the 1,000 to 1,500 hectare range. Now, keep in mind, if you've got a 10,000 hectare lake, you don't have to treat the whole lake. You only need to treat the area where the oxygen's low. And on average, it's about half the lake. Again, that's average. It's not every lake. And I've looked at all that for the 59 treatments to see where it, the central tendency and where it falls out. But the variation is huge. So you have to look at every lake separately. You don't do huge lakes. It just becomes insurmountable, unfortunately. And huge amount of money. Again, it's like the cheapest thing. It's still too much money.
And generally, who pays for it in the situations that you're working with? Is it residents or is it a municipality or a county?
It's a range. I've everything from private lake associations, but there you're looking at, tens of hectares total. The bigger ones have been done mostly by municipalities or the state. The best argument I've heard, and somebody asked about ways to get money in the comments I see. The best way to do this is do it everybody around the lake, everybody uses the lake, and say, okay, the economics show that you're going to lose 2 to 8% of your property value if you don't fix this lake. And that's an economic fact. Wouldn't it be worth 2% of your property value kicked in over 10 years to make this lake better and keep it that way? And they managed to raise enough money in those cases to get the job done. People have grasped the economic argument. Where you have people with their handouts saying, we want the government to do everything for us, it isn't working because we don't have that anymore. We don't have that in the US, we don't have it in Canada. I mean, those days are gone. I mean, my career started where they were just handing out bags of money from the federal government. It was amazing. Don't expect to see that again.
Right. Let's go to like a live question from Kendra. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Hi,
I do.
thank you. Oh, hi, Ken. Thank you for the presentation and thank you for the question. So the lake I'm at, Baptiste Lake, is more of a shallow lake. We have one outlet, and I'm noticing over the past few years at the outlet, there's a very thick matting on the bottom. Very, like it's got some holes in it. It maybe floats a bit. It looks just like a carpet. I'm also noticing the decaying matter that's happening on the bottom. It's very dark, very black. It has, I believe, it looks like almost a microfill or villi or whatever it's called that comes out of it. It doesn't even grow out of the bottom of the lake bed. It's actually growing out of the leaves and the decaying organic matter I think you were
Yeah.
speaking to. If there isn't flow to this lake actually over the last few years, the one tributary has a beaver dam that usually blocks it off. There's always a lot of talk about, do you keep it? Do you leave it? Um, I know around this area, it's getting worse there. So I guess my question would be, if this is not dealt with, like you're speaking to the dredging potentially, because I will attest to the dredging out front of my lakefront property. I've removed this dead and decaying matter that's black all on the bottom. It
Yeah.
usually happens in the spring because it was growing stuff up out of it that I didn't feel is good for the lake, for the health of the lake. I brought it out. I definitely did that following the rules, and it did make an improvement. It was removed, it was gone. So if we
Yep.
don't do this at the outlet and the outlet isn't potentially dredged itself and dealt with, what can be the worst case scenario? Is it that just keeps happening worse, or what can happen?
Yeah, it's just going to keep going. I mean, I don't have enough detail about your situation to know if it could possibly clear itself up, which is unlikely, or how much worse it could get, which I just don't know. And I don't even know for sure that it's blue-green algae, but what you're describing is very typical of blue-green algae growing organic substrates that are decaying. That isn't even the anoxic internal loading. It's just going based on organic decay. So removing that organic matter would be nice. You can still address it with phosphorus inactivation, but it's not really efficient with organic matter. So it's more like a maintenance thing. You got to keep doing it. But again, there's no easy answer in a lot of these things.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kendra. A bit of an interesting question from Dawn that I know we've chatted about a couple times, and I would love to get your take on this, Ken, is you said that the more phosphorus, the more cyanobacteria, but isn't the relationship, doesn't it also work the opposite way where the more cyanobacteria, the more total phosphorus? And is it necessarily that the more bioavailable phosphorus, the more cyanobacteria? Like, how do you tease apart the TP versus bioavailable TP versus cyanobacteria question.
It's a very good point that I didn't cover. A lot of times when the phosphorus goes up in the epilimnion in the summer, it isn't happening before the cyanobacteria occur. It's happening because the cyanobacteria are rising off the bottom and bringing the phosphorus with them. And then when they die and they do release the phosphorus pretty quickly, they can then allow other algae to keep growing in the epilimnion by fueling it that way. So you are correct that it isn't just more phosphorus breeds more cyanobacteria. Having the cyanobacteria brings you more phosphorus. However, it's a chicken or the egg sort of thing. But if you don't have the phosphorus to begin with, if it's not available, you can't grow the blue-green. So you can still stop it. You can interrupt it with this. The bioavailability does matter. The catch is the phosphorus being released by redox reactions at the sediment-water interface is the most biologically available phosphorus you can get. Stuff coming in with stormwater is the least biologically available because most of it's in particulate matter that has to be acted upon in the lake before it becomes available.
Interesting. Okay, thanks. And then maybe one quick question before we jump to Dörte is someone was asking about how do you define a deep lake versus a shallow lake?
Say that one again for me.
How do you define a deep lake versus a shallow lake?
Whether it stratifies or not is the simplest way. Now, that's still a little bit vague because some lakes stratify really strongly, some don't stratify at all, and sometimes they're intermittently stratified. But the worst case scenario for this is actually a lake that intermittently stratifies. Like 7-8 meters deep, deep enough to have enough thermal gradient that you lose oxygen at the bottom, but not so deep that it stays strongly stratified and keeps that sequestered. So you get a big storm, it mixes up, and then it's a total mess. And I have to laugh. We've been looking for a lake house for ages. And every time I see one that's 20 to 25 foot deep, 6, 7, 8 meters, nope, not doing it. Because I know how bad they can get. I want a really deep lake where I know it stays sequestered at the bottom, or a really shallow lake where what I see is what I get. It's tricky, but the break point is really around 5-6 meters. Once you get below that, you have the potential to have some stratification. Below that or above that, it's really rare. Although people think like dump dye into the water and you can get stratification in 2 meters. So or naturally colored lakes that have a lot of stuff coming out of wetlands. So, but generally speaking, I would define shallow versus deep as whether or not it has the ability to stratify thermally.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's throw it over to Dörte for a discussion about the recently posted in-lake treatment position paper from the Alberta Lake Management Society. So Dörte is a limnologist and a director and past chair of the Alberta Lake Management Society and was supporting the development of this position paper with a committee of our board over the past few months. So Dörte, I'll share my screen so folks can see what we're talking about here, but I'll let you take it away with the discussion. Oh, and I think you're muted. Let me unmute you there or try to. Yep, there you go.
Sorry, I have it right away. Thanks for the opportunity and hello to everybody. I think quite a few people I have met. So we have met previously at conferences or have worked together. So this is it's a little bit long time in the coming. So I want to start with why we prepared this. So on the Alberta Lake Management Society, the many years that I've been there on the board, on and off, Bradley came to us and had been approached by lake stewardship groups or citizens or even I don't know, other different people that around lakes with the question, we have this, someone is proposing this. For example, sometimes it was a development proposal, and sometimes it was actually a management, like an in-lake management idea or proposal. Can you can you give us some support here? Can you endorse this or something? And then it was always hard for Bradley and his staff, right, to come up with something that is actually that makes sense and it's scientifically proven and it has also the whole organization behind it, like the arms board and such. So we've always taken the approach of being quite neutral and saying like we can't really comment on individual proposals or such, which we also maintain. But we feel that as the Lake Management Society, we have this responsibility as a kind of central point of knowledge and science about lakes and working with the stewards and education. Like we should be trying to be helpful in some ways, anyways, when these questions are coming up, right? Because they are coming up very frequently, and there's a lot of ideas out there, a lot of providers, and a lot of information. Very easy to find the information through the internet, right? There's so much out there. It can be quite confusing, and sometimes something might sound really, really great, and you don't just know, is that something that would help our lake, or is it something we can afford? So we thought, well, we'll just put our heads together. We didn't, and put something together that's hopefully helpful. And I'd love actually to encourage you to provide feedback on this, because I'm also thinking, Bradley, I mean, it can be a living document if you feel like it has to be improved, right? I already heard some feedback, so I think there's opportunity still to improve this, but we did put kind of our main ideas down. So, and in our role as an advisor, or as a central point for lakes and lake management in Alberta. Also, another thing still upfront, what this paper is and what it is not. So we thought about what do we include, because there's so much, right? I mean, you heard Ken here, there's so much information, there's so much science. This could have easily become a thesis, right? A PhD thesis. We wanted it to be a relatively easy to read and short document that provides really some key pointers. So it's definitely not a detailed guidance document. So it's not going to give you the A to Z of all the things that you should know or do when considering in-lake treatment. It is more putting pointers and providing a framework on how to approach it, and maybe some resources are in there. And some of the key things just to think about, like just not to miss any key things and not to fall in a trap of something that seems to be really easy from the onset, but just to be aware of all the limitations or requirements around that. So that's our hope, that it is really a first starting point and guiding people in the right directions. So the content here, maybe going through that. One more, actually, I'm having an introductory. So also in terms of the intent, we wanted to make sure that the information is out there for what in-lake treatment is, and the science behind it, and what the benefits can be. However, also to point out how this works in the context of the whole lake system and the watershed and watershed management, and how it also works in the Alberta context, right? Regulatory, etc. So those are the things. I hope you're still listening. I know it's really interesting question answer in the chat, but so the sections here are just a little upfront introduction, easy, and like a summary as well. So like the next bit of summary. We talk a quick section on the science of the lakes. Really, like nothing you can't find elsewhere. Just kind of a big summary of all the things that make up a lake and that happen to have an influence on nutrients, and how algae blooms, etc., occur or can be caused, especially in relation to nutrients and other factors. We did focus here mostly on the impairment of lakes through algae blooms, like harmful algae blooms. So we did not look at a whole bunch of other issues that could be happening, right? So really focusing on what people are mostly, in our view, concerned about, which is algae blooms. So here's an overview. And again, there is, of course, much more information out there. I can demonstrate it today on the different methodologies to complete in-lake treatment. So those things that are considered in-lake treatments, And really, it's anything that you do right in the lake, right? It has nothing to do with watershed. It really goes, and sediment inactivation here is one that Ken talked about quite a bit, but he also mentioned the oxygenation, the withdrawal, mixing techniques, and of course there's many others. So there's some references to other literature as well. A little bit of a history tour of Alberta experiences. Things have been tried and tested, mostly in either an experimental environment by academia or any human-made systems. However, there's a bit of expertise and experience around. So just to let people know. The regulatory environment is really important. Sometimes people think, well, this is my lake, they'll just do something here because this is our lake. But lakes, surface water, right, are under provincial jurisdiction, especially for water quality. The federal government also has a thing to say, especially around fisheries. So can't just do anything in the lake without approvals. So there's a lot of that that sometimes could be underestimated, but can be a really lengthy and costly process. So very important to be aware of that. And so those are kind of the background pieces, and then we develop some high level steps to follow, like developing a plan. You know, what's actually the goal? Who's here around the lake, and where do we want to get the lake? Like Ken said too, we're not eliminating all the phosphorus. We have to have some kind of idea of what our goal is, and relate that to like a certain number or level of phosphorus, maybe, or like a range, or maybe it's just reducing algae bloom frequency. Like a goal statement can vary, right? But that's something that regulators will also expect, and then make a plan that also includes the understanding of the lake in its watershed as well. The second, do the science, characterize the problem, what is actually happening. We really want to know where the nutrients are coming from, why the algae are blooming. So there's a few fundamental things to understand. Otherwise, you'll use a tool that's just, you can't fit like a square peg in a round hole. So if the tool doesn't fit the problem, then you might throw money out of the window, right? And effort and all of that. So it's really important to get this all right, the science right, before you actually know what your major sources are and what your best bet is for a good management solution. And also to manage expectations, right? To know, well, if I do this, what's my expected outcome? I think that's really important. And then you go ahead and evaluate and select the options, right? Once the science is done, and there's a lot of decision making to be made. And again, regulatory is really important, financial, social. There's so many different considerations, right? A few example project questions here to ask. I think that might be helpful, just not to forget about certain considerations. So I hope that this is helpful. ARMS is here to answer questions, right? I mean, I really appreciate the stewardship, lake stewardship venue, where folks can come together and talk to each other, and where you bring in qualified speakers. Brad, I think that's really, really useful, right, for people just to get a sense that you're not alone, and there's people out there who know things about this and who can help. So always reach out to us. We're happy to support and answer questions, but we're hoping that this is kind of a place to go, and maybe something you can cite as well to your community, because there's always very different voices around the lake, right? Who might be promoting one way or the other in a certain extreme. Some people can be getting very opinionated, so we're hoping to be this is a little bit of a leveling the playing field, and providing good reason for moving forward with lake management. So any questions?
Thanks, Dörte. And Kirsten did throw the link to that webpage in the chat, and you can also download that document as a PDF. And thanks to all the directors who volunteered their time after hours to pull that together. Really appreciate all of you. I'm just going to scroll down here in the chat. Ken is just an incredible presenter because he is answering questions in the chat as we go. I so appreciate that, Ken. That's amazing. Are there any specific questions for Dorta? I see, Kendra, you have your hand up. Oh, no, you meant to lower your hand. I will lower it for you.
Oh, no, sorry. My question
Okay.
was a
Okay.
follow-up to Ken. I'll just wait.
Oh, sure. I mean, if you want to go ahead, people can use the next couple of minutes to put some questions in the chat for Dorta.
Sure. Ken, just in follow-up, I put in the chat there. So the lake I'm at is highly eutrophic. We have a municipality that basically washes its hands of it. Over the years, it's getting worse. So what would you suggest to a small yet mighty stewardship group, such as Bales, that I'm part of? uh, we're just really at a loss. Like it's how do we do the maintenance? Like I said, I went out on my own lakefront property. I did it mindfully, being respectful of the lands. I understand the approval process and what I'm to do and not do. And yet people are frustrated because there's just now we have this stagnant water that is making the water quality worse, and we can't seem to find anyone that will assist us with it.
Well, Dorta just talked about the need for a lake management plan. Do you have one?
Yes, we have one. We built one in 2019. Long story short, it was a really huge plan. We did some mapping sessions over the past year. We saw that it was really high reaching, way too much for a small group. We're now really we kind of went back, and our strategy is communication, education, and what can we do as a small stewardship group to help. So that's where we're at. So we have the plan, yes.
Well, it's just a
What do
matter
we
of
do with
following,
it?
I don't know your plan per se, but you follow the elements of the plan. I mean, there's nothing wrong with interim actions to get you benefit. I was smiling when Dora was talking about um, the need to do watershed management and look at that when you're considering lake management. I'm thinking, I was playing disc golf yesterday and I threw my disc into a sticker bush. I got the disc out, and sure enough, the sticker got me and my hand was bleeding. I didn't run home and get a chainsaw and cut up the sticker bush, which would have been the watershed solution. I put a Band-Aid on my cut. So there's nothing wrong with Band-Aid approaches as long as they're not your whole plan. It's and that, if maybe I realize you can't there, as far as I know, go out and use aluminum, but you can use lanthanum, do a treatment over that area and see if you can get relief from it that way. It's a relatively inexpensive, maybe a Band-Aid, but interim approach that may give you some benefit. How big is the area that we're talking about?
Oh, so the entryway to the outlet, it's large. I can't even estimate it. I wish I
Large and
had more
small
numbers.
relative terms. And I gave
Yes.
you're talking hundreds of dollars per gram per square meter per hectare. I mean, a hectare is, two soccer fields side by side. That's pretty big. I mean, you just
Okay.
got to figure that sort of stuff out.
It would probably be that, yes, 2 soccer fields.
Okay.
That one
That's
area.
not that expensive for a group to do.
Okay.
If
Okay.
it's worth doing, again, I don't know enough about your lake or your plan to know if that's a legitimate part of it. But if you've got the problem you described, I can tell you that that treatment could make a difference. Now, you could be simpler than that and do an algicide treatment to kill the stuff off. But that's definitely maintenance, and that has potential, you know, uh, corollary problems that go with it. And again, I don't know the permitting situation where you are, so I cannot advise you what to do, only what things are legitimate from an ecological perspective or management.
Okay. And from your presentation, what I did get was the flushing of it is important. And that's what I try to approach that at any table I sit at. How do we get this toilet flushing again, so to
Mhm.
speak, because it's turning into a toilet. Thank you.
Thanks for the questions. Yeah, lots of good discussion too happening in the chat. I think maybe one from John Mark Davies around when you talk about challenges with salinity or high salinity in some of the lakes that are interested in treatments. Is there a threshold for what you consider like high salinity or
Actually, there is an actual number, and I wish I'd known that before the one treatment got done because I recommended it. It did not work at all. And then after talking to Harvey Harper in Florida, he goes, "Well, of course not. You can't do this if the conductivity is higher than 1200." Like, duh, I didn't know that. uh, and sure enough, this had a salinity of like 2, which I've forgotten now the conversion, but it was way over that. Um, conductivity is easier for most people to understand because we don't work with saline lakes for the most part. 1200 supposedly like the limit. That's like, I think, zero point 0.8 for salinity. I have to remember what the conversion is. I've written it down for this paper, but I haven't gotten to that part yet. Um, it's low. It's really low. I mean, you're talking about brackish water or salt water? No way. But if you've got, like, this is a coastal lake that gets overflow into it and sometimes makes it more saline, but it's literally a salinity of 2 at the headwaters where they wanted to treat. It's a little pond up at the top. And that was too much, which I didn't think that would be the case, but it is. And I had another lake that we did, and it worked just fine. I said, well, I always thought that as being saline. They said, what was the conductivity? So I looked it up, 600. Half of what they were saying the limit was. So that kind of explained it.
Right. Okay. Very interesting. Yeah, I hadn't heard of that connection.
I
I'll just
didn't
take
either until last year.
you learned the hard way, I guess.
Yes.
I'm just going to share my screen one more time to close us out here. Um, Obviously, thank you to Ken and Dörte and the directors on our board who pulled that information together as well. Really interesting information, and I know it's a short session to really dig into this topic. I know we could spend a full day or a full week on this issue, so I appreciate both of you pulling together presentations that were still really informative and generated good discussion. This is the last of our community of practice webinars for this season, but we'll bring these back next winter with more interesting presentations and topics. So feel free to reach out to me if there's something you want to discuss or present. We can always build sessions around what people are interested in talking about. I have on the screen here a shout out to another webinar that's occurring next week, April 14th. This is by Callum McDonald with the Alberta Native Plant Council. And Callum has developed a presentation and course on Alberta's aquatic plants. So there's been a bit of a gap in this area in the province. And so we're really excited that Callum has taken time to look into this topic, and we'll be presenting this webinar on April 14th at lunchtime. Check this out on the Alberta Citizen Science Community of Practice webpage. We've got this advertised there. And then I'll also be hosting on the 23rd a webinar on a number of different topics that you can get involved with as citizen scientists this spring/summer. We'll be doing a quick speed dating webinar with citizen science. So just 5-minute presentations where you can get to know a citizen science program and hopefully find a match. So we'll be talking about everything from plant monitoring, mosquito monitoring, Franklin ground squirrel monitoring. We've got 6 different topics that we'll be introducing folks to. So if you are feeling you're missing these lunchtime webinars with alms, you can always check out these other opportunities happening this month. And April is, of course, Citizen Science Month, so happy to promote these upcoming opportunities. So with that, again, thank you, Ken. So great to see you. We hope to see you in Kelowna at NALMS 2026. Shout out to that. The registration is open now for Kelowna, and abstracts are now being accepted as well. So if anyone on the call wants to join us in Kelowna, please check that out at the North American Lake Management Society website. And thanks, Dörte, again for joining us. And I'll go ahead and stop the recording and end the session. Thanks, everyone.